Hi, I'm Martin Eyerer. Welcome to Riverside Studios in Berlin. I was just a DJ in a way. I started with 16, my career in 86, and there was no electronic music that days. And I started as in the weekends on a dancing school, where my mom just put me inside, and I actually never wanted to go there. And I figured they had a disco place for young kids in the weekends also. So I started being there and started DJing there. And later on, when I was a DJ in bigger clubs after that, in 88, 89, I met some guys. They were into music production in those days with electronic machines like 909 and 303s and stuff. And we built a team. And I think in that days it was kind of the classic setup for someone to start doing music. There were those guys, they were into machines and the DJs, so we teamed up, and the first record was released in 93 then. The first machine I bought was, funny wise, a 303. I bought it in 1992 for, let me think, it was 1,000 Deutschmarks in that times, which is 500 euros now. And we built up a studio together later, and I was still the kind of the couch producer in a way. And the longer we worked together, I realized I want to be in charge and in control, and to bring my own ideas into it more, like with my own hands. And I started learning it and started reading books, met other people which who I worked with, and went into it. And I built my first studio by myself in, it was like 98 or something. And from there I went pretty much into it, like 24 hours a day. I've been using Cubase since the first day, since I started my own studio. I don't remember which version that was, but it was in 98, so yeah. I like the mix of it, to be honest. I like to have outboard gear, and I like to have plugins, and I think there's not a point of this is better or this is better. For me, it makes the mix, and my setup is exactly like that. I integrate it into the DAW or DAW Cubase, everything, and I even mix down on my AMAC mixer, but I use a lot of plugins also from different brands. And Cubase slowly grew from version to version, in a way more complicated, but offered a lot of more options and possibilities. And what I liked a lot is pretty early they integrated to use external stuff with latency compensation, where you can like define external devices and use your synths and your effects, and it's pretty well integrated. I figured I just want to have stuff here I really use, and it's selected stuff. And if you check my setup, there's a lot of standards like 11T76 or LA28 compressors and stuff like that, or preamps. And I got some selected synths from Roland. I have a Moog, which I really like. Also, it's not always only the sound, it can be the feeling. And I like to have this feeling sometimes of my old Moog touching the knobs and it does something. And it doesn't necessarily mean there would be not plugins. I would put them on the same level, but my whole studio setup is, for me, feeling wise, very important. I couldn't feel really well if I have only a computer there. Even there, I know a lot of guys that do amazing stuff just with a computer, but I want to have this feeling of a bigger setup around myself, so I feel like a real engineer. Okay guys, I want to show you something about my setup, how I integrate the whole studio into Cubase, and I'm going to show you a little bit about one song of my album. It's called Departed, and I recorded a nice vocal with a Finnish singer, Casimir, who's a really good singer, and the song is sung in Finnish, which is a bit remarkable. But anyway, let me start. How is the studio set up? I have a lot of analog equipment, and I'm using Cubase and a lot of plugins. So how to bring everything together, that was kind of a challenge, because I need to have different setups in a way, because I work with other people like Anja Schneider or any other artists. That means for me I have to have a different setup within 10 minutes. And when you mix down everything analog on a big mixer like my AMAC here, for example, you could not change the mix as everything is set. So I have this kind of two, maybe three setups in a way. I'm using a summing bus from Neumann, where I run everything analogically through and I record the master here. That's actually the same how I use this AMEC mixer. So my system has a RME card with 200 in and outs, and everything you see here is connected to one out. That means I have some lexicon reverbs, they have like in and out separately. And the nice thing about Cubase is, which is pretty a while, you can set here external effects, for example, and I got everything set up here. You see, for example, the 480L, and then you have like in and outputs and stuff connected. So you can load these plugins into the setup very easily once you set it up here. For example, we can use it here. There's the channel for the MPX1, and then you have all the settings, and then if you go on a channel, you just use it as a send effect or as insert effect. That's pretty easy. The other scenario here is when we do big analog mixdowns, I want to just record maybe the analog sum of the whole mixing here. So I have a lot of outputs defined, which you have here. So there's a lot of outputs. And you can send each single track to one of those outputs. It goes into the mixer. I can EQ and tweak it and record back the master, so I have a full analog recording in a way. Or I just can use one channel, for example, as an effect, and let's say 16 channels are used of a mixdown, we just don't want to touch, but there's some not used channels, I can use them and run some signal through it. And that's actually what I really like about Cubase, the handling of external stuff and internal stuff. So I also can send a plugin like a contact or like a sampler or whatever through analog channels, and everything is there as I want it. Cubase is handling the whole latency with the latency compensation. And if you use one of those external effects I just showed you, for example here, then we have this dialog and you push this button. So the system would send a signal through the effect, it comes back, it measures the time it takes, and the whole system is shifting back the latency. So whenever you push play, it's everything on the right spot. And that's something I think Cubase came up with first of all sequencers. And that's one of the reasons I kept really using Cubase in times when maybe other sequencers had other points, but that is a really strong feature, I think. Also, in the meanwhile, if you use external step sequences and stuff, the MIDI timecode is run with latency, which was not the case in some points, but now it is. And we can use all those machines, like I got some of them, like the Roland TR-808 or the new stuff from Roland, which I'm a big fan of. And so, yeah, that's how everything comes together. Let's talk particularly about this song, Departed. The whole song started with a recording of a Rhodes theme, which might remind you a little bit of a Radiohead song, and it's inspired by it. And it has similar vibes. I recorded it with one of our piano playing guys here. And I put effects on it, like it was a fab filter delay, which is self-oscillating. So it makes that weird noise in a way. I just had this Rhodes, and then it was the case when Thomas, the singer, came here from Finland. We had a session here, a writing session actually. And it was the case he had to run to the airport to catch his plane. And I had this Rhodes thing, just a bass drum also. And we asked him, hey, can you do something quick? And they're like, wow, there's 10 minutes, forget that. And Ollie, my partner, who was also involved in the whole writing session, said, try something in Finnish. And he quickly did a one-off, and this take is it like, check that out, it's really nice. I run some external plugins on vocals. Like I'm using from Dolby modified gear, which is like an exciter in a way. I run it, in this case, through a UAD compressor. Sometimes I'm using also the Cubase compressor. It's pretty good actually. And yeah, that's for the vocal so far. When we got this vocal, Later, I recorded drums with one of the guys here in the complex, Henne. He's the drummer from the band Abbey, which I'm sure you're gonna hear of them later in the year. They're like the main act from Universal Germany this year, and they do amazing stuff. It's kind of electronic, alternative, rockish stuff, and they're all amazing musicians. So we recorded with him all the drums and stuff with him, so you can hear that's all the tracks here. You know, I used, I don't know, 7 microphones, and later I put that in the song. Yeah, we edited and cut it, and the result was then like in the arrangement. There's a lot of this live drumming. That's what I meant before with organic. So my album is about, it's still clubby, but it's also, it has organic elements. And later on when it drops in, there's the road is gone, the roads, and we have all this drumming here on the track. Yeah, I recorded the drums, I arranged it then, and rendered it to those single tracks, you know. That's actually, that's something about Cubase I like and I don't like. In a way, all the functions are amazing, what you can do with a time warp and corrections. What they could improve, in my eyes, you have different windows. It should happen in one window, I think. So the workflow could be a bit faster, but at the end there's no desired open, as you say. You can do anything with any audio material, stretch it and tweak it, because it's clear when you record like 3 minutes drum recordings, it will be never on time, even though the best drummer in the world can't handle that. So you have to correct it and stuff. That's what I did and cleaned it out. Mainly my external gear is used outboard wise. Like I run signals through it, through preamps, EQs. I got Siemens EQs. I have Manley Amic 1998 compressor, and I'm a big fan of external reverbs. I have this Lexicon collection, 480L Model 200 and stuff, so that's what I use a lot. Synth-wise, I sometimes do use the Mini Moog or this new Roller and stuff, but I like to have a lot of plugins for that. Particularly the bassline comes here from Trilogy, which I'm a big fan of. So that's like if I solo it, it's a pretty simple bass line. The whole track actually is pretty simple, if you, unless like the drum recordings, which is complex, but the whole track lives from 4 or 5 tracks in this case. Sometimes you have arrangements with much more going on, but I like to have it stripped down. And when we recorded these roads, we felt this is already happening and there's something, and just the roads and the vocal together makes the whole track in a way, and you even don't need anything else, I think. So you can hear it does the job already. Even just add one bass drum, which comes from a secret weapon in my eyes, called bassism. You should check that out. It's a 808-ish plugin, and you can define like everything about this drum. And yeah, that's my bass drum, and I always tune the bass drum. I work actually most on the relation between bass drum and bass line. For me, a track, if the bass drum and the bass line already fits, half of the track will ever sound really fat and warm. So I can spend some time on it, like using sidechain compression sometimes on the bass and stuff like that, and tweaking here and there. And when people work with me, they get sometimes a bit bored because I work a lot in those details. But later on, I'm pretty fast on everything, because I figure when this is fitting, everything fits. The key is, of course, when you have frequencies layering on each other's, it will sound muddy and not nice, clear. So how do you mix it clean and detailed is to set a low cut, for example, on either the bass drum or the bass line. So you have to decide where is the emphasis on which frequency. So do you have a bass drum which is really low? So you need to give in the whole mix down the space for this frequency. For example, if we talk about 50 hertz and below for the bass drum, the bass line should be cut on that level, which I have done here in a way. You can see I have a cut here, and I also push this bass line on 100 to 120 hertz, because this is more the main frequency of the bass line. I also use, which is a very nice tip, I think, this plugin called multiband sidechain from Vengeance. The thing is, it's a sidechain compressor with no key signal, and you can separate frequencies, like you have higher and lower frequencies. So you could leave the higher frequency not touched, which is not compressed, and just take the lower frequency, which is compressed in a grid which you can define here. We need to hear the bass line also. Where is it? Let me find it. It's here. Now you see, you can on the lower one I'll set this grid here, and it's side chained, and it leaves the space for the bass drum. So that's also a way how to give space to bass drum. Sidechain compression is the magic thing here, definitely. And if you never went really into it, it cleans up your mix in a lot of elements. You can even use it on these Rhodes, which goes down on frequency wise. So the bass line here, as said, we have in the same moment the sidechain compression, and we have the low cut. That's pretty much the main thing. And don't forget, of course, to find the right sound of the bass line is for sure the key, and has to fit with the bass drum. Yeah, also on the output on the bass drum, to show you that and get it completed, is I pushed this bass drum here on 50 and 100 a little bit, so you see there's no cut, because in this point my bass drum has the main focus mixing wise. It can be different. It can be, you can use a bass drum which is more hard and has more power on 120 hertz, make this dock really loud, and then maybe the bass line could have the low end, and this could be also then the whole mix will sound really nice for sure. But I think that's one of the most mistakes people when they start making music do. They don't spend enough time on sorting exactly this out. They just put, okay, this sounds works and this bass drum sounds nice. And that's why sometimes it can be millimeters of moving the EQ here and there, because you have also the shelving and stuff. So I started this album 3 years ago, actually, in Stuttgart, and it had to lay there, of course, because we were so busy with constructing, and also the other work had to go on. That's why, coming back to the first question, since when I used this studio, it was the first one I had to finish under pressure, because I had a part-time location here in Berlin, and it was 6-month contract, so I had to move out, and here was huge construction, still dusty and everything, and we finished this room. So I started working here and slowly also getting back to my clients with mastering, mixing and recording. So there was no time at all for my album, and I felt I really had to release this album, because the last album was 3 or 4 years ago, and as an artist, as a DJ, you always have to come up with new stuff and keeping yourself interested for the audience and your followers. So there was a really bad feeling growing on my back, like this album has to be done. And I reached a point where the constructing process was running and everything was running, and I started working on it. And since I have this bigger studio now, which is an amazing setup, because I have a recording room with a lot of nice gear like drums, Rhodes, pianos and stuff, my plan was to create an organic album with a lot of recorded and organic instruments. And I started using and asking people here for cooperation, like drums, or Tilly, who is a guy who plays guitars and cello and stuff. And yeah, so the album took me another 7-8 months to finish, and it's finished. I completely mixed it down on my iMac, and I'm very happy with it now. Musically, my album is a mix of, as I said, organic stuff, but still every track can be played in a club in a way. And I think it's important, because for me it makes no sense when DJs try to show they can do down-tempo music or something, because I also don't want AC/DC to show me how techno could sound when they do it, you know. And it's a good question, how can an album concept work? And my solution for this time is, we release this album, it will be released on my label Klingklong Records, as in 4 EPs first, which are 4 EPs with 3 tracks each, club singles in a way. There's 6 weeks in between, because the thing is, DJs and listeners who are one part of the audience you produce an album for don't want to have 25 tracks in one go. They will choose 2 favorites and the rest falls apart somehow. So I figured let's split it in those 4 EPs, and then later, after 6 months, I will release the full album on CD, physical, and on iTunes and stuff for the other part of the audience. And I think that could be the solution how to make an album these days work for an artist. And yeah, I mixed it down. The whole thing runs through my MX, so you can hear, like, if I, for example, let's solo the Rhodes again, for example. So it's here on this channel. Yeah, so I have it completely, as I said before, everything runs through the whole MX, and it's summed here, and it makes definitely some sound, because this mixer has not only some history, it's technically on a very high level. We recapped it 3 years. I have a friend, he's an engineer, he helped me, otherwise I couldn't even afford that. And we already spent a fortune into it, and each channel has DBX, VCAs, the black ones, the old ones, and you can definitely hear that when you drive signals through the mixer, it sounds really, really well and warm and rich. That's also a point I really like about Cubase. The sound engine is very strong, very clean, and I can hear differences when I work with other sequencers, or someone brings me stems or materials to mix down, and I just run it through Cubase and then run it again to those channels or my Neumann. They're like, wow, even if I haven't touched the signal already, you can feel, okay, this is like getting more rich and more clean. So I have, for my sound card, the inputs here, yeah? And you should always watch out the levels first of each channel internally, so don't overdrive the internal channels. This is also something people do sometimes. Let's say Cubase internally has a lot of headroom and it's really hard, like overdriving, but you can overdrive everything, of course. So when you start a mix down, I think you also comes back again, should start with the bass drum or the bass line, depending on what is the focus on, as I said before, to set like a general level, because normally this will be the most energetic channels. So once you set up this level, the rest comes naturally. Maybe it will be not like that loud. So watch out when you set the level of the bass drum first in my setup, because I come back analog. If you work internally, you just watch out that. I set this, and then I set also like the from the mixer, the master, so I don't overdrive the inputs. To show you the levels, you see the fader of my bass drum here is pretty low. Why? Because I'm already here pretty much on the top. I left some headroom for later, in case to make everything a little bit more loud is easier than everything like really pulling down in a way. Cubase has a nice feature. You can glue channels together in a way, you know, like you just mark them, and then you say here, selected channels connect, and then when you want to change it, okay, there's a new feature actually. You can define what is connected, there's volume, and I use also the dynamic processes, because the volume influences the input level, of course, which is a nice feature. It was not there before, I think. And now you can, if you would connect the whole mix, for example, you still can adjust the levels and not overdrive internal channels. That's why, by the way, when I use my outputs, I use buses, because when you sum outside, you will have maybe 8 stereo buses and come back with 1 stereo, of course. And I run everything through those 8 groups. I create groups so I can easily adjust the levels at the end. So, and on the analog side, we go here, that's the input of my mixer. You see we are here on channel on those 2 channels, and if I put up or down the master fader of the MX mixer, I can make sure it's not overdriving, and especially before I do the final mix down, you have to really care about levels, because that's a very important thing, leveling in generally about any setup. And especially again, if you work internally, also that's really something you should always consider, to keep your levels on high. Also returns of any plugins or any internal reverbs and stuff, so you're not overdriving. Okay, coming back to simplicity of a mix and also of a whole track. The longer I'm doing music, I realize it's always not adding stuff. It's using some elements and working on them, because I know it's really when you're not that experienced, especially when it comes to an arrangement, for example, you want to do an arrangement of 7 minutes. There's some tracks running, and you always have this feeling, I need to add here something and there something and a new hi-hat and this and this and that. And I think the best tracks usually are very simple, and that's why also this track has not a lot of tracks, and the secret is more working with the elements by itself. And here it goes also hand in hand with the whole mixing, because the less channels you have, the better the mix will sound, of course, because each channel will have more energy and the whole mix will sound strong and full and really fat. And the more things you have going on, it gets more full and like mixed up and muddy in a way. So it's really hard to keep control with 120 tracks, which we have in pop arrangements where there's a lot of instruments going on. Yeah, making club music means the less elements you have, the better the mix will sound, and maybe the more interesting it will also be, because single elements will be more in the focus. And the secret is, how can I how can I create a 7 minutes arrangement with not a lot of elements? Play with the elements and sometimes mute stuff and not add stuff. That's what I figured. And as said before, also your mix down will get better and better, because you know by yourself, if you just have one bass drum, one bass line and one hi-hat, it already is really like rocking and fat, because it's only 3 elements, and the more add, it gets fuller and fuller and fuller. And a lot of tracks on my album, actually a lot of tracks I generally produce do have not a lot of elements, but you should choose those elements very careful and not just take stuff and add stuff and add stuff. For example, how can I have this Rhodes theme going on for like a couple of minutes and keeping it interesting? It's for example, I have this timeless delay on, which is self-oscillating, so it's in a way always evolving, and there's something is happening, and you never have this feeling it stays, but that's very subtle stuff. I soloed the Rhodes again, and to hear that feedback, I stop and you hear it, you know, and that's always happening in the background. Some people ask me, hey, wow, what's this track that is like screaming and stuff, and it's actually this feedback which is never stopping, so it's adding up and adding up. So that makes, in a way, subtle, the whole Rhodes more exciting and more interesting through 4 or 5 minutes. And that's how I work on details sometimes and keep an arrangement interesting. It's the same with when you have drum tracks, or if you have any other element, you sometimes put a small delay on in the arrangement, or you mute it just for 4 bars and something. So the listener will not realize sometimes it's missing, but when it comes back again, then it's okay. And so that's how you build up arrangements. And again, the mixing is, for me, it's some of the most important points, because you all want to buy tracks, they sound fat. When you go on Beatport or on those stores, you check music, you're attracted to music that sounds really well, and in the club it's totally banging. So mixing, you have to have it on focus and check out.